Okay, welcome to the Swing Trading with Cycles channel. We're going to do a review of Amazon today. It's a follow-up video. You'll see a link to the previous video. Should also come up on the upper right-hand corner of your screen at some point here to give you a chance to take a look at that video. When we did that video about a month ago, a little bit more than a month ago, we were above 100. We're now here down at 88, and I think there's still more downside. So let's get into it. We're going to look at the Amazon charts on their own, and we're going to look at the ratio charts. Amazon divided by like the S&P 500, for instance, to get a sense of if and when Amazon is outperforming the broader market. Because that's how you want to invest, right? You want to invest based on what's going to be doing the best relative to the baseline, right? Because you could always just invest in the baseline, the index. So let's just start on the monthly chart. Well, let's start on the annual chart really quickly. We went over this in the previous video. Again, we're way below the previous year's low. That's important because it means anyone that bought any buy that happened last year is way underwater, right? And we're also below the low, well, just almost below the low from 2020 as well. So that's important. That's your annual chart. And if you look at the monthly chart, you kind of zoom in a little bit from there. You can just see this just like waterfall lower. So at some point, it's going to get a pretty violent, like this was a pretty violent move, like on a monthly basis, right? So on this month, we had a low of 105 and a high of 137. So we went up like 32% in a month for a stock this large. We're talking about $1 trillion company. And then we also had follow through that next month, which ended in a lower high. That's important to understand how that works. You can see we got up there, and also to understand at one point in real time, this was a green candle, right? So this is a green candle. It closes a green, beautiful, big, long candle. And then the next month, and let's just be clear here, this is July. And then August, you started with a green candle. How do I know it was a green candle? Because we know it opened here, and I'll zoom in. We know it opened here, right? And at some point, it was all the way up here. So this whole thing was green, this whole body. Very bullish, making another higher high. After this already made a higher high on the monthly chart. We're getting follow through, about to test this level, and then no, failed. And this gives you the pattern of a bearish outside candle. Now, a bearish outside candle is a candle that makes a higher high and a higher low, right? And then closes red. In this case, we did not make that lower low. We closed here, but then we got follow through on this candle and then this candle. So a way to think about it is these three candles, right, are like the combination of those three candles, and I'll just add the outline so we can all see what we're talking about here. And you want to start thinking about it that way, that like don't always just think about what the exact representation of the data that you're looking at right at that moment. Think about how it can be kind of manipulated and looked at a couple of different ways. And manipulated is the wrong word, but I mean how you can kind of think about it in a different way. So almost imagine if I took this candle, and this candle and combined them into one candle. That would be a quarterly candle, right? That's what a quarterly candle is. Right, so you have this quarterly candle becomes a bearish outside candle of these three candles, right? If I drew a box around those and said, okay, that's my other quarterly candle, well, you can see that. So that's a way of you're already seeing the patterns without having to even switch to the different time frames. As you gain more experience, you should start to see that it'll jump out to you. The point there, though, is that this is a false breakout, and it makes sense that we got this cascade lower. And again, at some point, we're going to get another lower high. And then it'll be a question of, is this going to follow through? Is this going to fail the way this did, or is it going to actually continue to follow through? But for now, we're definitely, well, I shouldn't say definitely. We're very, very likely going to make a low below last month's low, November's low. And it's December 6th, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that. So last month's low was 85.87. We closed here at 88.25. So you have at least that, $2-3 of downside. But you imagine that we're going to take out this pivot here too, right? So that pivot is down here at 81.30. I mean, look at that. That thing is going to be is a magnet. And then you've got this pivot. And I'm not even saying we're going to get exactly to that level, but, you know, price aggregates. And it's going to aggregate towards that area, I suspect. And then, depending on how we react to that level, the low 80s, if and when we breach that, then you put $65 on the table. That's your ultimate, like, okay, that's where you've got to expect a big bullish reversal kind of situation. Or otherwise, you're now talking about getting into the low 40s and just really working your way down these swing lows, which obviously wouldn't be super constructive. And as always, we'll watch price time in real. We'll watch price action in real time to understand when is the time to act. But the trade right now is a short position, right? So I have $90 strike puts. And the thesis here is, if you think about this sort of pattern here, you had this massive consolidation. I mean, look at this chop. This is a weekly chart, by the way, excuse me. Just look at all this chop. So starting, let's call it in July 2020, like after a big run up off the COVID bottom, it just stalled and just went sideways until it took this leg lower. It made this lower high, and this is the lower high we saw on the monthly chart. That's the multiple time frame analysis, folks. This is the weekly version of that, right? That's the false breakout, if you will. And then we come down here. So you imagine we're going to get another bounce at some point, but not before we at least make a low below here. So that at least gives you one level to unload those puts. And I wouldn't be surprised if this weekly cycle takes us to, testing that pivot down there at the 81 level, which will give us intrinsic value on those puts of like $99. And I paid a lot less than $9 for them, of course. And if you think about how that looks on a daily cycle level, really kind of zoom in, this sort of cycle that we're in, if you will, has lasted 19 days so far. And we had a top on day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And if you think about other rallies, right, like you can sort of just, this rally, for instance, right here was 15%, right? This rally was 20%, right? So you can start to kind of get a sense. This rally was 27. This was 16. And obviously these all just kind of failed, petered out. This was 15. That was 26. So all that to say, we've clearly, like, this rally has done everything that you would have expected that it would, even though it only lasted 5 days. Now, if you think about the declines, though, right, that's interesting, right? So from here to here, that's 15%, and that's 23, 28. We're down here at 41. Yikes. So how much have we declined from peak to trough since this little peak here? About 15%, right? Okay. And so at some point you're going to get a daily cycle bounce, some kind of like little bounce, like, one of these little things or these little things. And so that's when you would add to the position. I'm going to look to unload once we at least take out this pivot. I'll look at the reaction there, see how much to unload. But I mean, look at this. When you just look at this chart, it's clearly telling you it wants to make a low below that monthly low, right? And so it's really just a question of how does it react when it gets there? Does it try to bounce strongly? That's obviously a sign to get the heck out. Or does it look like it wants to seek out this one, like right then and there, right? But I mean, this is a lot of downside. This is 5 straight red months. And obviously this month just started, so it's 4 straight red months and all lower lows. At some point, this is going to be an amazing buying opportunity because we know Amazon isn't going anywhere. But speaking of that, let's flip over to the relative chart, right? So this is a ratio chart. Incredibly important concept because, again, as I mentioned at the outset, when you're investing, you want to get the most bang for your buck, obviously. And so you could always just invest in an index, or if you think a stock is going to outperform, you would invest in that. And so in this case, for Amazon, it's actually done that outperformance in spades, right? So on the left hand side is the Amazon chart itself, and on the right hand side it's the Amazon chart relative to the S&P, so the SPY ETF. And you can see it's been up only for the relative chart, for the absolute chart, but also for the relative chart. So that's important because it's like even while we're making all these highs, it's important to know we're still doing better than the average stock. So it's not like the average stock is doing better than this, right? But notice we already talked about this big swing high, right? That's what that is. When you make a lower low on the chart, you create a swing high. So we already talked about that, but look at that, right? So that is really important. Again, so this is, and sorry, take a step back. This is your yearly chart, just to be clear. So every candle here is in one whole year of price action. So this is your 2022 candle, and this is your 2022 candle. So you see it's red on both fronts. So it's a red year in absolute terms, and also red versus the S&P. What that means is both the S&P and Amazon are down, but Amazon is down by a lot more. What I want to draw your eye to, though, is the swing high for the absolute chart, for the Amazon chart, is from 2021. For the S&P relative chart, it's actually from 2020, which means Amazon peaked against the S&P back in 2020, even though it kept making new all-time highs on an absolute basis. That's always important to know. I'll say that again. A stock can be making higher highs relative to itself, but making lower highs relative to an index, for instance. That's not a good situation to be in. Think about that. Again, why would you invest in an individual stock that is not outperforming an index, which is going to be lower risk? So if we zoom down to like the monthly level, we can see like that peak came, right? So your Amazon peak came in, was it July or was it November? Yeah, I think we made a higher, we made a slight 88.11. Wait a second. 88.65. Oh, that's good to know about. So Amazon actually peaked in July 2021, whereas the rest of the NASDAQ peaked in November. That's important. And relative to the S&P, it peaked in July 2020, right? So basically peaked literally wow, that's interesting. So it peaked in July 2022 on an absolute basis, but it peaked in July 2020, or excuse me, 2021 on an absolute basis, and then but it peaked exactly a year earlier relative to the S&P. And I mean, look at this incredible downtrend versus the S&P, and then look at this big droop down. So this tells me that at some point we're going to get a violent reaction up. So again, on an absolute basis, as I said earlier, but also on a relative basis, where Amazon is going to be up like 25%. And the market's going to be up like 5-10%. We're going to get that eventually. It's going to be a question of, is this a long-term bottom? Because clearly you were smart to own Amazon this whole time, right? Now you certainly have this period of muck where you kind of traded sideways. But generally, you've been moving higher. But, I mean, this has been a long droop down. But it's going to create a huge opportunity when it does turn for those that do understand how to read sort of price action. And if we zoom in on the weekly chart, because we kind of talked about this, we have this little lower high here versus that, versus that, versus that, and I'm expecting we're going to break this pivot. On a relative basis, we're making lower lows already. That's good, because that tells you, and that's important, just taking a step back, the broader market is moving into a daily cycle low right now. Definitely take a look at the video that goes into detail about that, like the broader indices. And so it makes sense that, individual stocks are being pulled down, and the weakest of the weakest are going to be pulled down even most, right? And so it makes sense it's making new lows, even though it's kind of staying above that low from the week of November 7th. So all of this is great news, and if and when we do get a bounce around this pivot, that's going to be what you kind of monitor for your next leg lower and a potential short again. But I think the big opportunity is going to be on that rally back up, because we know Amazon is there. It's a durable company, and I imagine that once this and we could be talking about a multi-year period, right? But once this period is over with the market, it's going to find a point. It's gonna outperform again at some point, right? Like this is going to continue again once this period is over. So it's going to be a glorious opportunity, but an amazing opportunity to make money in the meantime with puts if you are so inclined, if you're aggressive. So we're going to leave it at that. That's the sort of lay of the land. I'll actually just really quickly, just before we wrap, I'll look at this versus a QQQ, because that's obviously a better comparison. And it's the same, like you notice, it's not that different, right? Like it's the same kind of idea. But let's see, what month did it peak? Was it the same month? July 2020. Yep, same idea, right? So same, and it makes sense because the biggest names in the QQQ are obviously the biggest names in the S&P 500. But same kind of idea. We're going to be watching for that on this channel. If you did find value in this content, please consider subscribing, and definitely hit that notification button so you're getting those timely updates. Thanks for watching.